Welcome to Ponchatoula Live, the show where we make it easier for you to connect with the people of Ponchatoula. I'm your host, Parker Layrisson, and today I've got a fantastic guest. Now, we're going to do a little bit of a twist today, and instead of interviewing somebody right down the street in Ponchatoula, we're going to interview somebody 1,000 or so miles away, but who grew up here in Ponchatoula and has been a fixture of our community and comes from long-standing local families. And so she's one of our best and brightest to ever come out of this town, Dr. Emily Barsley. You may know her as the daughter of the famed junior high principal, Barsley, or Dr. Barsley. Great parents who we know well, and I'm sure we'll get to talking to them. But Emily, with no further ado, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Parker. I'm excited.
Well, we're certainly excited to have you. First of all, tell us where you're coming to us from and maybe a little bit about yourself, if you don't mind.
So I am live from Southwest Washington, D.C. right now. I moved here about 6 months ago, but I was born and raised in Ponchatoula, Louisiana. It is my home, and it will always be my home.
Well, we're so proud of you still down here. I am just a couple blocks from your mom's old school where she was the principal, and, of course, a few blocks from your old house, right across the street from your mom's school. And we're so proud to see you do so well, and you'll always be a Ponchatoula girl, to us. And it's glad to hear you still have that in your heart. Why don't you tell us, if you will, what it was like growing up in the Barsley house? Because you come from a home where you're two educators, renowned educators. Your mom a principal, your dad teaching at the dental school. An internationally acclaimed forensic dentist. What was it like? I mean, being in such a smart household, and what was childhood like there?
So with two highly educated, somewhat overeducated parents, I spent a lot of time focusing on education. But I feel like that's one of the best parts about Ponchatoula is that even though it's a small town, you can still get an education that will take you around the world. I've been to 38 countries so far in life, and that all stems from where I came from and actually where my dad came from. I went to the same junior high and high school that my parents graduated from. They might have been new buildings, but they were the same ones that they went to. My actual first school, though, wasn't like a parent kindergarten. I actually lived in Bethesda, Maryland, so about 40 minutes north of here.
So you kind of came full circle there, right?
Yeah, I've come back to DC, even though
Bethesda is basically kind of a suburb of Washington, D.C., and it's in Maryland there. I used to live, I went to school my junior year in an exchange program at American University in the northwestern quadrant of town, very close to the Maryland line. And so tell us, what brought the Barsleys to Bethesda?
So my dad was picked for a Robert Wood Johnson Healthcare Policy Fellowship. So besides dad being a dentist, he was also a lawyer and affecting healthcare policy change. So you went to the Hill and you got to be under one of the senators, a representative. We were Senator Bro for Louisiana. And so he would go and help with healthcare policy legislation. I went to Bethesda Magnet Elementary, which was kind of like a small UN type situation. All the kids were from all over the world. It was wonderful.
That's really cool. Yeah, it's neat to say, because your dad, what a Renaissance man he was. And of course, I'm going to ask you much more about him later. But he was known as Dr. Barsley. Of course, everybody knew he taught at the dental school, and he was in demand around the world because he was an ultra specialist in what he did. But I don't think a lot of people knew that he was also an attorney. Of course, I knew he was our city judge. And when I was the city prosecutor, I worked in his court and saw him in action. He was a very bright attorney, but it was almost like a secret identity, like an intellectual superhero, where you kind of had to know him pretty well to know that was in his bag of tricks. Really cool. So what do you remember best about Bethesda? And if you will, give us a picture, a glimpse of the transition from big city, suburban DC, Bethesda life, and coming back here to hometown Ponchatoula. And what do you remember about that kind of journey?
So Bethesda was a very strange school, and they were ahead of us in education. I remember doing multiplication tables and division with the aid of drums. They would do a beat, you'd have to count, and then they'd say times or division, and you have to go to the next beat and then figure out the answers. I'm in kindergarten, I'm like, this is insane. What is this? I just learned my ABCs. But it was a very artsy school. I did actually half a day kindergarten, half a day first grade. and it's where I really started to get my love of math because it was such an early integration.
Well, I
Everybody
could have
showed,
used that drum technique about a half hour ago
yeah.
because I just finished homework with my first grader in that room right there where I'm
Mhm.
pointing to, and I didn't have the benefit of any cutting edge,
Yeah.
technique like that. So that's cool to hear about what they were doing up there.
Yeah. It
Um,
was wonderful. They made it a competition. Everybody wanted to answer. And then they're very arts focused too. Like DC
right?
is the Smithsonian capital. So we were
Yeah.
going to the National Portrait Gallery, the Natural History Museum, the Renwick Gallery, all these different places were our normal field trips.
Hmm.
Um, and so
Yeah,
that
I
was
think a
great.
lot of folks, until you get there, you don't realize. You mentioned the Smithsonian. I don't
Mhm.
remember. You can correct me on the count here, but it's 17, 14,
Mhm.
something north of a dozen. The Smithsonian is not just one,
Yeah.
building and one museum. It's this whole string of buildings up and down the mall. It's like a giant, giant system of museums, if you will. And they're
Mhm.
not the only game in town. There's the
Yeah.
Holocaust Museum and all these great military museums and other.
Mhm.
I mean, what I loved about living in DC, of course, I was super poor then. I was a young student, but there were a million and one things to do that were free,
Yeah.
or very inexpensive. So that
Mhm.
was really cool. But it must have been a real blessing as a little kid to live there with all those resources.
Yeah, it's something that I cherish forever, and I still remember very vividly. I took my husband to the Natural History Museum, and I was like, "We got to go see the bull mummy. It's in the Egyptian exhibit." I was fascinated as a child. I had a limit on how many times I could force my parents to go just to stare at this mummified bull.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And so,
I
like
loved it.
now,
The Aerospace Museum
it
always
just
just blew me
reopened.
away. Oh, really? That's great to
It
hear. That I
reopened
love.
last week on Friday, and we had some of the first tickets to go see it.
Oh
It's
wow,
been under
that's
construction for
cool.
like 5 years.
Yeah, that's neat. That sticks out. And I'm gonna tell you the other one. This is a little embarrassing because
Mhm.
it's a scientist like you may be less impressed, and a young person like you from your generation may not get it. But the American History Museum had Fonzie's jacket, that black leather jacket from Happy Days, and that was really cool to a youngster. But that dates me as much as the gray in this beard here. So you have this kind of big city existence. You come back to Ponchatoula, and as you mentioned, you go to the same junior high. I mean, essentially, your junior high, where your mom
Mhm.
was the principal, eventually was also the building where your parents went to high school, where my parents went to high school. It's this iconic big building. What do you remember when you came back? Like, because you're coming from
Mhm.
these advanced schools. How long did it take you to acclimate and kind of make buddies and become a Ponchatoula girl there?
It was almost immediate. I remember my first day in first grade, uh, my mom taking me. I went to my classroom and she was
Mhm.
like, "Oh, this is Hayden Griggs," and she's your
Oh,
best
hey,
friend.
hey.
And my parents, like, they just both told us that we were each other's best friend, and
Yeah.
that was all that needed. And I didn't necessarily miss all the free museums because we still did lots of great nature tours in school, and then
And
we
you
went
had the
to
Collinswood Museum. I mean,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
Smithsonian worthy, let's be real. Well, Hayden Griggs, what a wonderful woman, and how cool that you guys both made the journey up to DC.
Yeah.
She's such a successful young woman, like her big sister Hannah.
Mhm.
But I love her. Of course, the Griggs family is one of the oldest and best in town. But when she was a little kid, I remember we were on vacation once at their place in the lake. And as a fun little gag, she wrote a book about me, and she entitled it The Book of James. Didn't quite live up to the original Book of James for obvious reasons, but it was really neat. She was so detailed. I remember she put, I was your favorite high school teacher was Carol Dahmer, and all that. She had all these rich details from my life, and it's been neat to see her and you grow up, and all your gang, your generation. But wow, what good fortune to sit next to somebody like that. What a quality person
Yeah, I
on
think there
day
are
one.
actually 5 people from Ponchatoula right now. 3 from my graduating high school class. My friend Ray Seibenkettle, who graduated with me,
Wow.
he is the accreditation manager for Howard. He's getting his PhD at
Whoa.
George Mason. Yeah. Um, one of my cousins retired from the Navy and is
Hmm.
in the Navy Yard area. And then whenever I actually moved into my apartment here in Southwest DC, I had a LSU flag
Yeah.
that was in some of my boxes that I was carrying up. And a woman was like, "Oh, you're from Louisiana?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm from Louisiana." And then there was construction noise, and she said the word Ponchatoula. And I was like, "How did you know I'm from Ponchatoula?" I thought maybe something was hanging off that was really strange. She goes, "No, no, I'm from Ponchatoula." And I was like, "That's incredible that, our town population is like 10,000, and
Yeah,
that,
I think it's more like 7,000
yeah."
according to the census. Yeah,
In
it's
a city
amazing.
of several million, I met someone from my hometown, and then it turned out that in like the 90s, my mom actually taught her. So
Oh, wow, that is so cool. What a small world.
yeah.
Really, really neat. Well, it's great to see you guys thriving up there. Well, let's talk about the kind of education experience here in Ponchatoula, because clearly we're going to get to your work and your
Mhm.
professional credentials, and they're tremendous. But this is a small town in a poor state, and
Mhm.
we don't have the resources of a place like Bethesda or Northern Virginia or even Washington D.C. Where all these places where you are now. But clearly, it prepared you well enough to become a physician and become an accomplished doctor. So tell us, if you would, just kind of give us a run through of the Ponchatoula public system as you came up, and
Mhm.
if you don't mind, share some memories of that, maybe some teachers that really made an impact on you.
Mhm.
But now would be a great time to maybe throw some props at those hardworking educators, like your mom, who helped you get where you are.
Yeah. A lot of people think that, because we come from a poor area or a small town, that it doesn't have the resources to help you get to where you need to. But I mean, I found that like with the one-on-one education and the very personal nature that you have with your teachers and them knowing your parents and knowing where you came from, it really allowed me to have extra, uh, just extra time and extra effort.
Right.
Being a big fish in a small pond, I can tell you now that I actually went to St. Joseph too for a little bit. And so
Hmm.
my fifth grade education in genetics was equivalent to what I was learning later on in medical school, and is still the best foundation I've ever had in a science class. That was Miss
Wait, we
Abear.
got to back up there, because fifth grade I did fifth grade at St. Joe, and I don't remember genetics. That doesn't mean they didn't teach it, because Lord knows it's a sieve here. But tell me about who was your teacher and how did they cover genetics in fifth grade?
It
That
was
seems
Miss
great.
Abear, and she
Uh huh.
actually lived across the street from me,
Oh,
a couple
cool.
years later. I think she still does. Um,
Wow.
I don't
Wow, that's
it was
impressive.
just the absolute best foundation. Everybody in the class was on the same page. We went step by step. It it became like a core memory, almost like such a building block that was never dismantled. And I'm telling you, I was in med school, and that building block was still like the first,
Yeah.
10 pages of our first chapter on
Well,
genetics.
it's great to hear you say that, because I would never compare my academic credentials to yours. I could not have gotten into med school, period, much less prospered. But I am proud that I did fairly well in law school. I was able to be first in my class first year, and do well and become editor in chief of the Law Review, and I graduated from Tulane with honors. And I say that just to say that the smartest students I ever sat next to this day
Mhm.
were at PHS, and the teachers here prepared me to compete with kids at Tulane that had gone to the best prep
Yeah.
schools in the country, and in law school that had gone to places like Yale and all these great schools. So it sounds like you would say similar things there, and that this little town prepared you to compete with the best of the best academically. Is that right?
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Just because it's small doesn't mean it can't be mighty. The time that you get and the ability to express yourself while you're not in like this big competition, got to get into a better school, got to get into anything. And
Hmm.
if you allow yourself to just take that education, take the time, you have the best foundation, and that can't be shaken.
Yeah.
I was valedictorian at PHS. I graduated summa cum laude from LSU undergrad in Baton Rouge, and then I went to LSU Med School in Shreveport, and I graduated in the top quartile. So it
Wow.
it 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 stays, and now I'm in DC.
Yeah, that's just amazing. Well, tell me, so clearly you were getting, the great resources at school and in the
Mhm.
community. Let's turn the light in on your parents, because as you mentioned earlier, we joke about your parents being overeducated. Two of the smartest people Ponchatoula's ever produced. What was the home environment like? I mean, were they pushing you, or how did they foster this interest in academic growth? And clearly they gave you great genes. We see that all over your family. Your cousin Ashley, you have all these brilliant folks, but You know, it must have been much more than that. So how did they nurture you as a student?
One of the best things I think my parents ever did is that whenever I came home, it was immediately time for homework. So even if dad wasn't home or mom hadn't gotten home from school, I was a little bit of a latchkey kid.
Hmm.
Um, I would come home and do it all, and then after that, I could do whatever I wanted. Play on the computer, go play with my neighbor. But education came first. So as long as it was done and I maintained my grades, it was perfect. I never made a B. It was always expected that I was going to make good grades, and if not, I would like lose my car for a little bit or get grounded with books, the Harry Potter series specifically.
So the priorities were clear.
Yeah.
Education came first, and it
Mhm.
sounds like as long as you got it done, you had some latitude on your own.
Mhm.
But if you were to falter, and thankfully it doesn't sound like you did much, yeah, that things would tighten up some. Well,
Mhm.
that's really cool. Well, what else do you remember? But aside from the great educational foundation, Ponchatoula, I don't know yet if you're of the age to be nostalgic about the little small town streets you grew up on. But what do you remember about the fun of growing up in Ponchatoula when you and Hayden Griggs and whatever other buddies you had in those days got to having fun once the homework was done or the weekend came? What were y'all up to? What do you remember fondly about this little town?
So all of our neighbors in our block had gates to each other's yards, and so the second it was done, I would head out my back door through the backyard and to my neighbor Trey Marino's house, and we would go
Yeah.
bike riding. Every 15 minutes when we were done, we had to come check in, but we had our perimeter set where we could go and have fun and just be kids, or playgrounds that were set up between both of our houses. It was wonderful. It was a great childhood. There was no worry about cars or anything like that on the road. We were well taken care of.
Yeah, it sounds really similar to the, experience I had, half a generation or so before you. The biking around town was kind of
Yeah.
central to the thing. Now my little law firm runs a Bikes for Kids program every
Yep.
year, because it was such a big part of my childhood, and we want to share that with the kids now. Of course, they have busier streets now.
Yeah.
They got to be twice as careful as we ever were. But that little neighborhood you grew up in was special too. My best friend my whole life was Will Richardson and his brother
Mhm.
Ben, and their grandparents Betty and Hollis Poche lived right around the corner from me.
Mhm.
And so I spent a lot of time on that part of town, and it is a nice little hub there. There's not a lot of terrible traffic, and it's nice
Mhm.
homes, nice families like the Marinos and
Mhm.
others, the Edmonds and such that lived over there. So that sounds like a lot of fun. Now you're in the big city. What
Mhm.
differences do you see now? I mean, as I recall from my brief but fun stay in DC, I love certain aspects of it in that you could walk to all these places if you wanted to eat or get
Mhm.
coffee or whatever. The public transportation was phenomenal. I didn't have a car when I lived in DC and never felt like I needed one. But what are the differences in big city life now versus small town? And I'm sure the pros and cons, but you're really one of our few guests that can speak to living in a major metropolitan area. So if you would tell us a little about that.
One of the best things about living in a big city is that everything is in delivery. I have Amazon. Like if
Oh
I order it
yeah,
now, it can be three
right.
hours. A drone will come drop it off. It is pretty intense. We have
That's
delivery.
cool.
Everything is at our uh, doorstep. But I do miss like the community around small town restaurants. Like we can go to a new place every night here, but
Hmm.
we're not going to form like a real relationship with the staff like some of the places you see, going to Kieran, going to
Right.
Jocknell, um,
Yeah.
all of that, and it's incredibly expensive.
It is. It is. Now, I will, just to get off topic a little bit from our usual show, but since we're if you haven't been to Philomena yet in
Uh,
Georgetown, I highly recommend. But to show you how small the world can be, and I think it was President Reagan's favorite restaurant. President Clinton ate there, I think, too, a lot. And anyway, special to me because the night I proposed to my wife in Washington, after she said yes, thankfully, we went and ate there, and it was a blast. But by chance, my associate attorney here, my colleague Megan Notriana, was up there on a girls' trip this week. And anyway, I texted her to see how things are going, and she said, "Oh, it's great. I'm eating the meal of my life at Philomena." And I'm like, "What? That's where I went when I proposed to my wife." So, and we had never talked about it. There was no kind of comment, and not my recommendation. But if you love Italian food, and I think you do, that's one of a million great spots in town. It's a great culinary city. So that's cool. Yeah, we've got a few fine restaurants here, but only a few because it is a little town. Why don't we do this? Let's talk a little bit, if you will, about your PHS days, because you mentioned you were an accomplished student, you were a valedictorian. And I know that you really got a strong foundation there, which you alluded to earlier. Let's talk about the people there, and whether it's favorite teachers or clubs you were into, or, coaches or whatever. But, one thing we love talking about on this show is PHS, because almost everybody in town, filtered through there at some point. At least at some generation here, even if they have younger kids going elsewhere. So what was PHS like for you?
I remember my first day at PHS and Mr. Campo's physical or science homeroom class, and I was terrified. And I can 100% say that Mr. Campo is the reason I am a doctor today. He is the reason that
cool.
My love for science became the forefront of my education. If not, I probably would do math, something like mom had. Other teachers I remember were like Cassie Vining. She had taken over from Miss Kim Zabia for the art teacher, and it was just a wonderful.
Big shoes to fill there. Wow.
Yeah, I know. And because I remember going to Miss Kim's house for the Strawberry Festival and getting to do all the art projects at her house, and now I had to do it 4th grade with a new person. But I stayed in it. Mr. Coach Edwards was my physics teacher my senior year. And while it was tough, it definitely prepared me for college. I think he teaches at Hammond now. But Ponchatoula was great. I'm trying to remember who my Miss Poncetti. Miss Poncetti.
Okay.
She passed away, but she was my biology too. And she was the one who definitely steered me towards medicine. I remember doing all the different dissections that she had offered and experiments. And it was a hands-on environment for biology, which a lot of people don't get to experience.
Well, thank you for sharing that, because teachers don't get their due. I mean, as the daughter of educators, and it's neat to hear how they inspired you to greatness. I want to share a couple comments here because, folks, as you see here, we're talking with Dr. Emily Barsley, but I want our viewers to know that if you're watching live, you have the ability to share a comment. So our mutual friend, Lisa Inman Funk. Hey, Lisa.
Hey, Lisa.
She let you know she's watching. Oh, you were talking about some of her kinfolk earlier, the Marinos, playing in her sister's backyard as a child. And Mandy Franks Braywick, who has also been a guest on the show. And I saw her, was it yesterday, Mandy? I'm losing track of days, but our boys are running cross country together for their last meet of the year this week. She says, hey, and congrats on all your success. Mandy, thank you for watching and supporting us here. Folks, if you have a question for Dr. Barsley, if you'd like to leave a comment, whether just a congratulations or ask her a question, feel free to share. Mandy's letting me know, yes, it was yesterday. Thank you. I must not be sleeping enough. I'm losing track of days here. But yeah, so we do have the ability to handle your comments here. So if you have a question about anything we talk about here, or if you just want to say, hey, feel free to chime in. We're chatting with Dr. Barsley. So let's talk about the next step in your journey. I mean, you mentioned going off to LSU, both for undergrad and law school. So that means Baton Rouge 1 and Shreveport 2nd, right? Yep. So tell us about that. I mean, when you leave a town of 7,000 or whatever Ponchatoula's population is, and you go to a major university with many times that and students alone, what was it like? What was your first year like at LSU? And, who were your roommates? Where'd you stay? Just give us a little bit of, what life was like back then.
So I went to LSU. My roommate was Dakota Cheyenne. We don't keep up, but I was in the honors college, which was a wonderful place to be. It was in the middle of campus. The cafeteria was right behind it. And then all of my classes were within 5 minutes. I highly recommend, if anybody has college age students, that they should stay on the dorm in campus, because once you move off campus and have to drive in, your ability to get yourself to wake up and actually sit in classes finish from personal experience.
You better watch out, because your mom's watching this show, so we don't want to tell too many stories about missed classes.
I know.
Gwen, I hope you're doing well. Mandy has another comment here asking about your mom. She says, does your mom get to visit often? She was an amazing teacher. So tell us a little bit about your mom and And please answer that question by all means. But I'd love to hear more about Gwen Barsley behind the scenes. I'm sure there are tons of students that had her as a teacher or principal, etc., that would love to know more about her personally. So please share. Give us some dish on your mom.
So mom, I was actually the first fetus in Louisiana to have chorionic villi sampling done.
Whoa, that's a mouthful. You're gonna have to educate me. My degree says Juris Doctor, not medical doctor. So that was an earful.
So it was one of the things like going to med school, when you go and you learn about pregnancy and everything, especially whenever you have children when you're older. So my mom was about 40, 41 when she had me. I was the first fetus to have villi sampling done, which just meant that they were testing to make sure I was okay. And so we would go and do the procedure in med school whenever on our OB rotation. And it was a way to connect with the patients and be like, it's okay. We'll keep going through this. And like, I was the first fetus that had it done.
Yeah. So you're like a human success story right there in the room with them. That had to be so reassuring. My wife both of our boys are at-risk pregnancies because she has epilepsy and she had a seizure with her second son when she was pregnant. And I can tell you that is so worrisome, whatever your, issue may be, age, medical, situation. So that had to be really cool for your patients, for you to share that with them and put them at ease.
But so, mom was very much the same as she was at school, at home.
Yeah.
And she does visit often. She still sat down with me every night for homework, especially math homework, educating, making sure she connected. And then even in medical school, when I was in Shreveport, so 5 hours away, it's a long drive. She would probably visit about once a month, stay for a weekend.
Oh, wow. Super mom.
Yeah.
Not only the 5 hours, but folks, let's think about this. You're visiting Shreveport, right? We're not talking about, it's not the land of the Smithsonian and great restaurants Emily's been talking about where she lives now. Take it from a guy who's, was first hired in law school by a judge in Shreveport. It's not a travel, unless you just love the casino. Yeah, it's nobody's idea of a travel destination. Well, I mentioned your mom's watching, and she's got a comment here. She mentions that you guys were able to travel all over the world, because of your dad, and it offered so many levels of learning. So, if you would tell us about Dr. Bird Barsley. I mean, your dad is one of my lifelong heroes, and we miss him. He was a mentor to me and so many others in this town. But tell us about what it was like, to be raised by him.
All my friends called my dad Mr. Man. And the running joke was that if he was ever in the newspaper, there would be like 2 or 3 sentences, maybe a paragraph about what he was being honored for. And then there would probably be about a whole page about all the other stuff that he had done.
It was a very long list.
Yeah. And so it was great that anytime he had a conference, whether it was for his, law degree or dental degree or combination, I went with. I guess it was cheaper than getting a nanny or a babysitter as an only child.
Well, and let's talk about that. So he's sitting at this intersection of the law and medicine and dental. And so, when that intersects, and especially in forensic dentistry, right? I mean, in identifying bodies, and I'd love for you to share with us, because you can do better justice than I ever could, his great work in Katrina and all this other stuff around the world. But it's super important stuff, because I can tell you, as a guy on the law side, so often we have a case, whether it's a personal injury case, like the cases I do, somebody rear-ended by an 18-wheeler. We can't win that case without medicine involved. We have medical causation issues, but in the criminal world too, you have issues of, the bodies that have to be identified, et cetera. So he had this really unique perspective, because it's not every day you find somebody who's a doctor, lawyer, dentist, and so he put him, as I understand it, in demand around the world. I mean, when you talk about going to conferences, you're not talking about just going to Shreveport to talk to LSU Medical, although I'm sure he did that. You're talking about, the Prague or wherever. I mean, he's being invited to Eastern Europe or Asia or whatever. So if you would just tell us a little bit about where y'all went, because I want to make sure people understand we're not just talking about heading down to Nichols and Thibodeau to talk, in the Louisiana circuit. He was a really big deal.
I mean, so before I entered high school, I think I had been to 40 of 50 states. It's a lot.
Wow.
So we would go between there, and then later on, like the International Society of Applied Biological Sciences, which was take place in like Split, Croatia, Dubrovnik, Croatia, international. He did body identification, like you said, but the group that he was with, they would do it not just for, Hurricane Katrina, but you're talking about victims of mass graves going back to World War II. I'm sure the group is now going to be pulled to the Ukraine. And so it is literally around the world. One of the important things about Dad was that being a forensic odontologist, so forensic specializing in teeth, is that he was president of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, which is somewhere between 5,000 and 15,000 members. And as an odontologist, he was only the 5th person in their 100-year history to ever hold that position as a dentist.
Wow, that's so impressive. Well, we don't have enough time to share how much great things he did. Of course, how much he meant to you as the world-class dad he was, but also a mentor to me. And he was such a good friend to my family. When nobody thought my dad had a chance to be sheriff, your dad was there working every rally, cooking red beans, doing whatever grunt work needed doing. Just a great guy. And I saw him in action as an attorney, as a judge. He was fair. He was bright. He was hardworking. I couldn't say enough good things about him. And your mom was every bit an equal partner. I've seen her up close and personal after she retired as principal. We shared an office for several years. She was, of course, I think the assistant treasurer to the governor. I might, Gwen, forgive me if I got your title wrong, but she handled all the governor's money. And anyway, just a brilliant woman. And what an amazing partnership they had. But look, we don't have as much time as I like today because I'm about to have to drive the Hammond to be installed on the TARC board as president. So I want to turn our focus to you, Emily, because Dr. Emily Barsley, like your parents, you are incredibly accomplished. Tell us a little bit about what you're up to now in your career, if you don't mind.
So I went to LSU Shreveport for medical school, and I actually matched there, which is a very complicated process of picking your specialty. After you get your MD, you need to be certified. And so as I started in anesthesia, the COVID hit, and that was intense. My hospital went from 50 ICU beds to 167 ICU beds overnight. And so I worked throughout the entire COVID pandemic between the OR, the ICU, specifically veteran care ICU, and really found out, kind of like my dad, that I wanted to change. So during that time, I got married. My husband works for the Air
Congrats
Force.
on that. I'm loving the ring there.
It's
I'm excited for you.
So he does electronic warfare coordination, and he used to work on the B-52 bombers, which are based in Shreveport.
Cool.
And then he got kind of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and we moved here to DC for Andrews Air Force Base. Doing that, I had to relinquish my residency, but I did it with the support of my program, and they're actually helping me transition up here to psychiatry. So, Dad was a dentist first, and then he had his practice in town. He was like, "Oh, I don't know if I like people," and then he went to law school, and he was like, "Oh, then dead people. That's where my practice should lie." And so mine's kind of the opposite,
Which is so funny because he was such a people person personally, right? You see him at a cocktail party. He's the most interesting man to talk to. But yeah, you're right. He preferred to work with his patients dead. That's funny.
Yeah, so I'm kind of the opposite. I didn't want patients who were asleep and I couldn't interact with. I found in my pre-op clinic where I would help them make sure that everybody was ready for surgery. They'd be asking me, will you be my anesthesiologist? And I have to say, no, I'm just here in this clinic and I'll be on this or that. That I really wanted sustained patient care and working with the VA specifically. My favorite population of patients is veterans and veteran care. And so I'm changing to psychiatry while we're here, hopefully. And I want to focus on, but as my husband has to go to different bases in the future, potentially, they always need psychiatrists for active duty care as well.
That's so important. And, my wife works in mental health in the school system. She's at your mom's old school. She's a clinical social worker. So she counsels kids, in their mental health needs. And boy, you talk about a profound need. I mean, these soldiers, they like you say, wherever you go with your husband, that will be in need. And I'm so excited to hear a doctor of your caliber going into the VA because I've seen so many clients struggle. The bureaucracy there can be really tough. And there's some great doctors and staff that are helping folks get through it. But, from family members that are in the, VA system to clients, I've really seen it's tough out there in that realm. So they're really lucky to have you. That's super exciting. How are you liking it so far? Big change. but you have a smile on your face, so I
Yeah.
assume you are liking it. Tell us about that.
I love it. I'm happy I made the change. I'm happy I'm up here in Washington, D.C. There are like 5, 6 schools around the area. I mean, you have Howard, St. Elizabeth's, GW,
Hmm.
Georgetown, and then Shepherd Pratt. It's like GW has the only victims of political torture clinic where they help people who have come from
Wow.
other countries to, talk about and heal. There are
Hmm.
412 languages spoken. So it is a education and an experience that can't be found other places.
Yeah, that's just amazing. Well, tell us, give us a picture, if you will, of a day in the life. I mean, what is the job kind of like? Because I think it's probably hard for us here in Ponchatoula, where hey, maybe every 10th person we meet knows a little Cajun French or a Spanish
Yeah.
speaker here or there, but you really are in the center of this multicultural melting pot. What's that work like, kind of day to day?
So since I'm transitioning, I don't have a clinic yet,
Okay.
but I can tell you what it was like as an anesthesiologist. You wake up at 5 a.m., get your OR ready, go and meet your patients by 6, and then you're operating probably until 3. And then you need to make sure that everybody in the next day is prepped. And so that would involve language line, talking, and making sure that one of the things that, whether you're here or you're in Louisiana, is that health education is really minimal. And
Hmm.
you might be talking to someone, they're like, yeah, I just pass out sometimes. I don't really know what's wrong. And then it's like, oh no, you might have aortic stenosis. We can't go forward with this. So it's really a big, heavy interview, heavy practice, because with the
That's intense, and I think probably it's fair to say your average patient, and I've been one. We've all probably had
yeah,
anesthesia. We underestimate all
yeah,
the things that go into that. We're just thinking, hey, this is easy. You just walk in and put us to sleep, and your anesthetist is griping; they're doing all the work. It sounds like maybe that's not true. It sounds
yeah.
like
The best way to think of anesthesia is hyperacute ice. It's like hyperacute medicine while you're asleep. So
oh
not
my
only
god,
do I have to put you to sleep, I have to manage everything else that you have
right?
problems with while you're under, and anything the surgeon messes up.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. No stress there. That sounds
Yeah,
easy
nothing.
peasy. Well, yikes.
Yeah.
Well, that's really neat. I want to share a few. We've had comments flooding in as we're talking, and of course, I'm just enjoying catching up with an old friend here. But Mandy has said, Miss Barsley, if you're still here, she wants the world to know that you are her algebra teacher and you are amazing. So, Mandy, thank you for sharing that. You are right. She is amazing, and I think she's still here because she's showing some love.
Yeah.
Um, and we've got Diane Berthelot on here. Hey, Miss
Oh,
Diana, how are you?
hey, Diane.
She talking about your dad, of course, and says that he was the most genius but down to earth, generous, kind hearted person. And wow. Of course, you're right. You're such a dear friend to Gwen and Bird and Emily, and just a wonderful woman. So it's good to see you, and that pretty picture. You're such a beautiful woman. And then Mandy again is saying, talking just about how impressive you are, Emily, and of course she's right. So thank you, folks, for sharing those comments. I'm so sorry we don't have much more time
It's
here
okay.
today. This is a shorter interview than I'm accustomed to, and maybe we'll have to get you back on here if you can make time for us later. But before we go, I would love if you would be comfortable doing this, if you would share some advice with folks that are watching, and this
Mhm.
could be for parents who have children that aspire to be like you when they grow
Mhm.
up, or young women or men, anybody. Like, I know, because like I was a kid who grew up when I was in high school. I wanted to be a doctor one day. Didn't make it there. Had to settle for lawyer. Definitely couldn't double up like your dad and do both. But it is a grind. Okay, I
Mhm.
think it's probably, and correct me if I'm wrong, the kind of thing you can only understand if you've been through it. I always tell people that about the bar exam. It's
Yeah.
like, unless you've endured it, it's just really hard to explain. But if you would give us some advice, because you've done it, your parents have excelled and accomplished so much. Just if you would share with us some advice for folks who
Mhm.
want to be you when they grow up, because
Mhm.
you've impressed so much, and you provide us with an example that you can come from Ponchatoula and go anywhere in this big wild world and do well.
Mhm.
So please share for folks like my little nieces that
Yeah.
may be watching, how they could do that one day.
So don't be afraid because you're in a small town or a smaller school system. They will provide you the best foundation there is. I didn't use any additional resources going through school. I was Ponchatoula through and through. I went to the flagship school of the state and then one of our 2 public medical schools. It prepares you just what it needs. Don't be afraid because you don't have some flashy private education or you're not going to some flashy big university. You will still get what you want and you will get more hands-on care to get there. People will be better able to look out for you.
That's
And
great.
I would also just say, don't discount going to PA school or dental school, nursing school. Southeastern probably has one of the best nurse educations there is in the state. And one of the difference between when you want to go to healthcare, you want to help people. Do you want to be at bedside helping that person throughout the day, or do you want to be thinking about what needs to happen in their care afterwards? And that's really what separates being a nurse from a doctor. Like true care and compassion at bedside, is with nursing care. They're kind of our first flag. If something is wrong, they'll say, we've noticed this. Whereas you spend a lot of time in an office thinking about what needs to happen later and not as much time next to the patient.
Yeah, it's funny because I think when I look at a legal drama, for example, or any kind of legal show on TV, of course, it doesn't paint the picture of what practicing law really is like. For me, it's a bunch of boring, nerdy work, reading law books on the computer and researching and writing nasty letters to insurance companies. And that doesn't make for good TV.
Yeah.
And from what I understand, there's a similarity there with doctors, right? It's like nobody shows you in your office researching or, reviewing cultures or whatnot. Because that stuff that makes for a good TV show or movie scene is in the room with the patient. And it's sounding like the nurse is getting more of that action than the doctor. And I think it's easy to just kind of come up and say, I want to be a doctor one day without thinking through that reality. And, it's true here. Paralegals, for example, spend a lot of time in a room with a client, interacting with them, asking them, issues. And it sounds like same thing with nurses. So thanks for sharing that, because I think a lot of times youngsters looking at going to professional schools don't get that.
Yeah.
Your mom has commented here. Well, first, Liz. Hey, Liz LaPlante, your aunt there. Yeah. Speaking of great minds in the family. Please tell Ashley and her girls I said, hey, I don't see them nearly often enough. But your mom has come on here. She says you talk of law after medicine. So you are a chip off the old block. This gives me a segue to invite you back for a longer interview if we can. So I'd love to hear more about that if next time. So before we go, is there anything else on your mind, on your heart, anything at all you'd like to share with our viewers, our listeners here in Ponchatoula?
If anyone has any questions, or if they're even visiting, they want to talk more about school or what to do in DC, hit me up. I mean, it's easy to find me on Facebook or find me through my mom or one of my cousins. My phone is always on, and I will answer pretty much anything.
That's very generous of you. Well, we hope to hit you up and visit soon, because DC is a special place to Brandy and me. Like your parents, we were in the Mardi Gras crew for a long time, and I proposed to her up there on the Capitol steps, and it's been a while since we've been up there, but we can't wait to take the boys and show them. And when we do, I'd love to connect. So Dr. Barsley, thank you for sharing your time with us. To all of our viewers, thank you for tuning in. We'll be back here next week, and we hope to see you then. Take care.
Bye, Parker. Thank you, guys.